"You need to stop asking questions and just accept your nomination to the board," barked Valerie Maynard, the president of our HOA, from beneath her massive sun hat and overplucked eyebrows. She stood in my driveway like she owned it, arms crossed, lips pursed so tight I thought they'd disappear. I wiped the grease off my hands with a rag. "You showed up to my house to force me onto the board," her eyes narrowed. "Brandon Ellers, we've had 3 resignations in the past month. I'm not asking you live here, and it's your civic duty to help." I leaned against the hood of my project truck. "Funny, you didn't care about my civic duty until I started asking where the HOA's landscaping budget went." Valerie's nostrils flared. "I moved into Alder Mill Estates a year ago. Quiet neighborhood, lots of retirees, some families, and then there was Valerie, queen of the HOA, ruling through fear and fines. I kept my head down until I noticed our community park started falling apart. Then came the dead shrubs, the broken sprinklers, and the new increased dues letter without any explanation. I started digging, public records, contractor invoices, budget reports. What little I could find didn't add up. According to the HOA's own documents, we'd spent nearly $15,000 on park maintenance in the last 6 months. Except there was no maintenance. The only thing new at the park was the graffiti on the slide. Valerie stepped closer. "You're not getting anywhere with your little detective game. You're not an accountant, you're a mechanic, right?" I smiled. "I know how to fix things, and I know when something smells like a bad alternator." She jabbed a manicured finger at me. "You're joining the board, effective immediately." "I'll send you the paperwork." "I'll read every page," I said, locking eyes with her. She didn't like that. She huffed, spun on her heel, and stomped back to her golf cart parked illegally on my driveway, but that was her mistake. Because what Valerie didn't know was that I'd already forwarded my findings to a friend at the county auditor's office. And now, by demanding I join the board, she just handed me front row access to everything she was trying to hide. I signed the board acceptance paperwork on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting at my workbench under the humming fluorescents in my garage. A courier dropped it off. Valerie didn't bother to show her face again. She must have figured she'd already won by cornering me into the role. But what she didn't realize was that she just opened her books to someone who knew how to read between the lines. The following Thursday was my first board meeting. It was held in the clubhouse, a beige stucco building with broken blinds and a faded American flag fluttering half-mast for no one in particular. Inside, the air was thick with stale coffee and tension. Valerie sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 remaining board members, Ricky Tran, a nervous accountant who barely made eye contact, and Deborah Hawthorne, who wore sunglasses indoors and never put her phone down. Neither looked thrilled to see me. "Let's keep this quick," Valerie said as she shuffled through a printout. "We've got to vote on repaving the tennis courts, and then we'll move on to approving another round of fines for trash bin violations. Before we start," I said as I pulled out a manila folder, "I'd like to ask about the last 3 months of vendor payments. Specifically, the contracts for landscaping services and park equipment repairs." Valerie's smile faltered, just for a breath. "That's not on the agenda," she said. "According to our bylaws, any board member can request financial records with 72 hours notice." "I sent my request 5 days ago." She glanced at Ricky. He fidgeted with his pen, then stood up and walked to a locked cabinet in the corner of the room. He returned with a stack of receipts and contracts stuffed into a binder labeled Q1 expenditures. I flipped it open. The first thing I noticed: the landscaping company Greenscape Solutions used a P.O. box, no physical address. I jotted it down. Then I found the invoice for the park benches that supposedly got replaced last month, $4,000 paid to Civic Amenities LLC. "Anyone know where these benches are?" I asked, holding up the invoice. Valerie coughed loudly. "They're on backorder." Ricky looked down. Deborah didn't look up. I kept my voice even. Then why does the invoice say delivery confirmed and list a delivery driver's signature? No one answered. After the meeting, I didn't go home. I drove straight to the address listed for Civic Amenities LLC. Turned out it was a UPS store in the next town over, mailbox number 83. I rolled my eyes and took a photo. The next morning, I visited the county records office again and dug deeper into both companies. Greenscape Solutions hadn't filed taxes in 2 years. Civic Amenities LLC had only been registered for 8 months, and the registered agent, a man named Louis Maynard, Valerie's son. I called the state contractor licensing board. No record of either business holding a valid license. That evening, I compiled everything. Photographs, receipts, business records, and a list of payments totaling over $32,000 to those 2 companies alone. I submitted it to the County Fraud Division and copied a detective I knew from my time working part-time security at the local speedway. Just enough of a connection for him to take a second look. 3 days later, a black SUV with government plates rolled into Alder Mill Estates. Detective Ray Morgan stepped out, short and sharp-eyed, with a badge that made Valerie's voice go up an octave. "I'm told you're the HOA president?" Morgan asked, stepping up to Valerie at her front porch. I was across the street, trimming my hedges and definitely not eavesdropping. "Yes, but I don't. What's this about?" Valerie asked, holding her cardigan tight around her. "We've got a few questions about your vendors," Morgan said evenly. "Mind if we take a look at your financial records?" I'd never seen Valerie speechless before. By that evening, word had spread. The neighborhood Facebook group exploded with comments. Someone posted a photo of the black SUV. Another uploaded a screenshot of the business registry showing her son's name. The comments turned nuclear. The next board meeting was standing room only. Valerie tried to control the narrative. "It's all just a misunderstanding," she said, projecting her voice like a stage actress. "These were legitimate vendors. Then why did you pay your son's company with HOA funds?" said Mrs. Kepler, a 70-year-old widow who usually kept to herself but now stood up, arms trembling with fury. Valerie blinked. "That's a private matter." "No, it's not," I cut in. "It's a violation of Article 7, Section 4 of our bylaws. No board member can authorize payments to family-owned entities without full board disclosure and vote." Which never happened. Ricky looked like he wanted to melt into his chair. Deborah finally put down her phone. "I didn't know her son was involved," she said quietly. Valerie turned on her. "You signed off on the budget. You told us the vendors were vetted through the county," Deborah snapped back. "You never said a word about your son." Just then, Morgan entered the clubhouse. She didn't say anything at first, just walked up to Valerie and handed her a folded document. "Summons," she said. "You're being investigated for fraud, misuse of funds, and falsifying public records." The room went dead silent. "I'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow for a formal statement." Valerie's jaw hung open. No one rushed to her defense. Even the people who used to nod enthusiastically at her every word looked away. After she left, the room didn't erupt the way I expected. No applause, just quiet, stunned relief. Deborah leaned toward me. "What happens now?" "We hold a special election," I said. "And this time we do it by the book." She gave a slow nod. "You going to run for president?" "No," I said. "But I'll nominate someone who actually gives a damn." The next morning, I drafted a proposal to amend the HOA bylaws, adding mandatory third-party audits every fiscal year, banning relatives from receiving payments, and requiring all contracts over $5,000 to be publicly reviewed before approval. I posted it to the community forum and pinned it to the clubhouse corkboard. By noon, it had over 70 signatures. That evening, someone left a bouquet of sunflowers on my porch with a card that read, "Thank you for not letting her get away with it." I didn't recognize the handwriting. But it didn't matter. For the first time since moving in, Alder Mill Estates didn't feel like it belonged to her. It felt like it belonged to us. The first special election in Alder Mill Estates history was scheduled for the following Saturday. Flyers went up. A neutral third-party election monitor from the county housing office was brought in, and volunteers set up folding chairs in the clubhouse for what we all knew would be more than just a vote. It was a reckoning. By Thursday, Valerie had resigned from the board officially. Her attorney submitted a statement claiming temporary medical leave, which no one believed for a second. The investigation was already in full swing, and Detective Morgan wasn't shy about making her rounds. I saw her twice more that week, once stepping out of Deborah's house with a large envelope, and the second time interviewing a contractor near the maintenance shed. Most of the neighborhood kept their heads down, but you could feel the shift. People started waving again. A father I'd never spoken to before offered me a cold soda while I was walking past the basketball court. And on Friday afternoon, an older couple, Ron and Judy from Lot 17, brought over a stack of old HOA newsletters and meeting minutes they'd saved, just in case someone ever needed them. I spent that night at my dining room table flipping through pages going back nearly 8 years. Most were mundane rules about lawn height, parking regulations, the usual red tape. But tucked into a 2018 folder was something that stopped me cold. A project approval form for a stormwater mitigation upgrade behind the Eastern Retention Basin. Budgeted at over $28,000 with work supposedly completed within 3 months. Except I'd walked that area a dozen times. There was no upgrade, no new drainage, no piping. Just the same old overgrown slope and a crumbling chain link fence, the approval signature. Louis Maynard. I looked deeper. That same document was co-signed by a former treasurer who'd mysteriously moved out 2 months after the project completion. I cross-referenced that with the budget summary from the same quarter. The funds were marked as expended, but there was no receipt, no contractor invoice, no inspection report. I made copies and emailed them to Morgan with a subject line: another ghost project. By Saturday morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. The clubhouse parking lot was full before 9. People brought lawn chairs, coffee thermoses, and in one case, a cooler full of bottled water like it was a tailgate party. The election monitor, a woman named Patris with a calm voice and clipboard, called the meeting to order and laid out the voting process. 3 open seats, majority wins, no nominations from the floor. I wasn't running, but I'd nominated 3 candidates days earlier. Ron from Lot 17, a local teacher named Naomi, and a retired electrical engineer named Hector who'd spent the last year quietly fixing the clubhouse lights every time they shorted out. Once ballots were cast and collected, Patris tallied the votes with 2 volunteers watching over her shoulder. Less than an hour later, she stood and read the results. All 3 of our candidates won by a landslide. Ricky had withdrawn a day earlier, citing family obligations. Deborah didn't even show up. The new board took their seats, and the first order of business was to approve the reforms I'd drafted. The vote was unanimous. Mandatory audits, vendor transparency, spending caps without community review, and a formal ethics policy. It was a good day, but things weren't over. That evening, Morgan called me. "We traced 2 of the payments you flagged," she said. They were routed through a shell company in Nevada and funneled into an account under a different name, Valerie's. I sat down, heart pounding. "How much?" "Over 60,000, I rubbed my jaw, so this wasn't just local skimming, she laundered it." "She did," Morgan confirmed. "And we pulled bank records going back 5 years. We're filing federal charges, wire fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy." I let out a slow breath. "You need anything else from me, your testimony eventually. And if you come across anything else, send it my way." As I hung up, I stared out the window. The street was quiet. Porch lights glowed, kids were riding bikes in the dusk, and for the first time since I'd moved in, it all felt earned. 2 days later, the FBI showed up with a warrant. Black SUVs rolled into Valerie's property just after dawn. They carried out boxes, a desktop computer, even her router. Neighbors stood on their lawns in pajamas, watching silently as agents moved in and out. Valerie herself didn't appear. Word was, she'd been staying at a condo 2 towns over since the investigation began. The news trucks arrived by noon. One channel got footage of agents loading a safe into the back of a van. It aired that night, along with a segment outlining the charges: misappropriation of HOA funds, falsified vendor identities, and laundering public money through a network of shell companies. It wasn't just a local story anymore. The State Housing Board issued a statement condemning the misuse of HOA authority and promising to review internal oversight procedures. A legal analyst on the news explained that Valerie could be facing a decade or more behind bars if convicted. The community, meanwhile, got to work. Naomi organized a cleanup day at the park. Real volunteers, real repairs. Hector fixed the irrigation timer that had been stuck for over a year. Ron started working with the city to apply for a grant to install security lighting near the retention basin. People pitched in. No one had to be asked twice. One night, about a week after the FBI raid, I stopped by the clubhouse to drop off a box of printed bylaws I'd offered to reformat and print professionally. The door was open and I heard voices inside. "You think it'll stick?" Naomi asked. Hector replied, "The charges? Oh yeah, but more important people finally care." I stepped inside, dropped the box on the table and said, "They care because someone tried to take it from them." Naomi smiled. "We're lucky you didn't just ignore her and keep your head down," I shrugged. "I saw something wrong and figured I might as well fix it." "Mechanic logic," Hector said with a grin. Before I left, Ron handed me a folder. "Found this in the old records. Looks like Valerie tried to push through a rezoning proposal last year, quietly. Would have turned the empty lot near the school into a private parking facility." "For what?" I asked. Ron shook his head. "No one knows, but she'd already filed the paperwork to lease it under a company name, same pattern." I tucked the folder under my arm. "I'll send it to Morgan." As I walked home, I realized something. Valerie had been planning a lot more than just skimming budgets. She'd been laying the groundwork for years, trying to turn a quiet neighborhood into her personal piggy bank, but she made one mistake too many. She thought no one would notice. She thought no one would push back. Now she was facing federal charges, the community was rebuilding from the inside out, and the HOA board wasn't a secretive clique anymore. It was neighbors watching out for each other. And me. I went back to fixing engines, patching driveways, and helping out where I could. I didn't want a title, I didn't want power, but if anyone ever tried something like that again, they'd find me ready. Clipboard in one hand, flashlight in the other. The week after the FBI raid, Alder Mill Estates felt like a different place. Lawns got mowed without warning letters. Neighbors gathered in driveways without checking over their shoulders. The new board had already published the first transparent budget in years, and a newsletter announced upcoming repairs with actual timelines and price estimates. None of it felt like a miracle. It felt like something we should have had all along. I spent most of that Monday in my garage working on a customer's Chevy Suburban. Around 3 in the afternoon, I heard a car door close out front. I wiped my hands and stepped out to find Morgan waiting on the curb, her badge clipped to her belt as usual, but this time her stance was different, less formal. "You got time?" she asked, keeping her voice low. "Yeah," I said, nodding toward the porch. "Come on up." We sat on the steps. She pulled a folder from her bag and laid it across her knees. "The U.S. Attorney's Office is moving forward with charges," she said, "but something came up I thought you should see." She opened the folder and showed me a photo, an aerial shot of the undeveloped lot behind the retention basin. Then she pulled out a survey map marked with red lines and a stamped approval from the county zoning board. "This is from 6 months ago," she said. "Filed under a shell company called Fenwood Ridge Holdings." My jaw tightened. "Let me guess. Lewis Maynard again?" "Close." "This one's in Valerie's name." She used a maiden alias, Valerie R. Hensley. She applied for a variance to rezone that lot for commercial development. According to the paperwork, it was going to be a community wellness center. In a residential neighborhood, I asked. She nodded. The zoning board rejected it, but the odd part is how she filed it. The documents were signed using the HOA's EIN number. I blinked. So she used the homeowners association as a financial backer. Not just that. She submitted a forged vote summary claiming the board had unanimously agreed to support the project. Even included fake signatures. I leaned forward. That's forgery and fraud on a county filing. Exactly. And with the funds she moved through those vendor accounts, we have a strong case for racketeering. She wasn't just embezzling, she was setting up a long-term scheme to turn this neighborhood into a personal investment pipeline. I exhaled slowly. What's the next step? She's being indicted on multiple felony counts. The U.S. Attorney's Office is adding wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and falsifying government documents. Her arraignment is scheduled next week. I stood and walked to the edge of the porch, hands on my hips. The lot behind the retention basin was overgrown, but from this angle I could spot the survey stakes still peeking through the tall grass. She was going to put up a fake wellness center, I asked. More like a shell for laundering, Morgan said. She never applied for construction permits. No architectural plans. Just a budget proposal for initial grading and foundation work, $120,000, all of it to be funded through community improvement grants. The wind kicked up as I processed that. Valerie hadn't just stolen from our dues. She was preparing to defraud the county and state under the banner of community service. Morgan stood. The court might reach out to you for a formal deposition. You've been the most consistent source of documentation throughout the investigation. I'll be there, I said. She closed the folder and gave a nod. You did more than fix a neighborhood. You stopped a full-scale financial scam. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about how close it came to happening. If that variance had been approved, if no one had asked questions, Valerie would have built an empire on our backs. Invisible to most, but real enough to bankrupt us slowly. At the next board meeting, Naomi read a letter aloud from the county prosecutor's office, thanking the community for cooperating so fully with the investigation. The room broke into quiet applause, not for the prosecutor, but for each other. For the first time, people weren't just showing up, they were participating. After the meeting, Hector pulled me aside. You ever think about running for office? He asked. I laughed. I fix alternators. That's about as political as I get. You know how to spot a broken system, he said. That already makes you more qualified than most. I shook his hand and told him I'd think about it. The following Saturday, we held a community cleanup at the overgrown lot. Not to prep it for sale, just to reclaim it. Kids yanked weeds while parents hauled away forgotten debris. Someone brought a grill. Someone else set up a table with lemonade. Naomi posted a sign with a photo of the fake Wellness Center blueprint, titled, What Almost Happened Here. I walked out to the edge of the lot and stood where the foundation was supposedly going to be poured. There was nothing there but dirt and shadows, and I liked it that way. By the end of the month, the HOA's new bylaws were officially filed with the county. The reforms were locked in. The board opened a public fund for local projects, a real one, with third-party oversight. A few of the older residents who'd been silent for years started showing up to meetings, offering ideas, volunteering. Valerie's trial date was set for early fall. Her attorney requested a plea deal, but the U.S. attorney declined. Too many forged documents, too many fake vendors. Too much money shifted through too many banks. The judge ordered all her assets frozen pending the outcome of the trial. Louis Maynard was also indicted, along with two other individuals with ties to the shell companies. One of them turned out to be a former HOA contractor from another neighborhood, one that had mysteriously dissolved after its treasurer disappeared overseas. That revelation made local news. Suddenly, Alder Mill Estates wasn't just a quiet suburb, it was a cautionary tale and a blueprint for how to take your power back. On the anniversary of the election, the board held a picnic at the park. The benches were real this time. The mulch had been replaced. The sprinkler system worked. There was even a new sign that read, "This park maintained by residents who give a damn." I didn't bring anything fancy, just a cooler of sodas and a folding chair. I sat under a tree and watched kids run through the grass, neighbors laugh without pretense, and volunteers pass out flyers for the next project installing solar lighting along the walking paths. Ron sat beside me a while later and handed me a root beer. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" he said. "Feels earned," I replied. As the sun dipped below the horizon, someone started a small bonfire in the portable pit near the edge of the lot. People gathered around, telling stories about the changes over the past year. Someone joked about forming a neighborhood watch with matching jackets. Someone else suggested we name the park after Valerie's downfall. That got a few laughs, but no one meant it seriously. No one wanted to remember her. Not really. What mattered was what we'd built in the space she left behind. Before I left, Naomi caught up with me. "The city just approved our grant for the community garden," she said, beaming. "We're breaking ground next month." "That's great," I said. "Let me know when. I'll bring the tools." She nodded. "We will." As I walked home, the night air felt warm and still. Porch lights were on, not out of caution but comfort. The streets were quiet but not silent, not oppressed, and in the distance I could hear the sound of laughter, real, unguarded, and free.